Сегодня мы беседуем с Робертом Дилтсом, великим и могучим тренером из Америки. И мы рады представить Андрея Пликина, который пригласил Роберта Дилтса в Москву, благодаря чему больше 130 человек смогли принять участие в тренинге Роберта. Robert, I would like to ask you, how did you start your trainer practice? What happened?
How did I get started in NLP? Or?
Yes, in NLP.
Well, I was a student at the university.
NLP trainers or just NLP?
NLP and NLP.
Trainers.
How did you become NLP trainer?
This is
interesting
typical question.
Yeah. So, well, I was a student at the University of California at Santa Cruz, and I was a junior, so the third year, and I had, my first year I was interested in art, so I studied art and drawing and these things, and then the second year I switched completely and I was studying physics. So I didn't know it then, but I was going from the right brain to the left brain. But then I thought, well, okay, art is interesting, physics is interesting, but there was still something missing. So my third year, I switched to politics. So because it was about people, it was about something that anyway, something I was interested in, the more social. And as part of that study of politics, I thought, well, I should learn something about language and linguistics. So I took a beginning linguistics class. And who should be the professor of linguistics in this time but John Grinder.
Sure.
So it was 200 people in this class, and there was John Grinder. And he was just working with Bandler, and they just
I believe we have been in this audience.
Yes, you've been in that same room,
the same
in the Millennium Project. And anyway, so John and Richard were just working out the first of their models, the meta model, which was about the language pattern.
Which year was it?
This would be 1975.
Uh-huh.
And so 35 years ago. And,
not so much.
And anyway, they taught us this process of, someone uses words and you ask questions. And I thought, oh, that's very interesting. And in my politics class, we were studying Plato, with the dialogues of the philosopher Plato, how he was always asking questions. So I thought, oh, I will take what Bandler and Grinder are doing with this language with therapists and see what is Plato, apply it to Plato.
What will happen?
What will happen if is Plato, when he asks these questions, is he using the meta model like Erickson or Fritz Perls? And so it was very interesting to do this. So I turned it in as a paper for this class, and John Grinder was very interested because he thought, oh, that's a different application. So I got his attention, but John was very open, and I began to, do more with him, and then he did another class, and it was a more smaller class, so it was more intensive work. And they were really developing these ideas of the very beginning of
Does he look like official profession at that time?
Well, he looked like a professor in California from the 1970s, which was not an official professor.
That was unusual time.
Not a tie.
And how did you become a trainer?
Well, so like I said, I was studying, and they were doing groups up at their house with Frank Pucelik and Judith Delosier and David Gordon and Stephen Gilligan and Leslie Cameron Bandler, and so I was going to these groups and became sort of very involved. I was a little bit like John Grinder's experiment, because Richard had people, and so John had some people that he would give us assignments, and we would go and do things. So basically, I kept being involved in that, and a lot of the basic things like the eye movements and language patterns and strategies And I mean, in those days, there wasn't any NLP training. It didn't even have its name until 1976. So in 1975, it was.
I had heard the rumors that IQs, they don't recognize that time. Students discovered that, and in the moment they don't believe that. Is it right?
No, I don't know. I remember my memory was in my second class with John Grinder. He was giving this assignment that was a very interesting assignment to linguistic students because he was talking about how does language change our consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
So he gave us an assignment. He said, take something that you've never paid attention to before and give it a name. And then notice how if you give it a name, how your experience changes. So I was talking with him after class, well, now what do you mean if it's something I haven't noticed before? Could it, is it something inner or outer? And he said, what about that? And I said, what? And he said, well, your eyes just moved. And I said, oh yeah, I guess they did. And so I was trying to understand what were my eyes doing, and I gave it a name like an unconscious cue.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
And when I gave it that name, it was a very interesting experience because as soon as I gave it that name, all of a sudden it was like, shades coming from the eyes, and I was seeing eye movements and people blinking and all of these little cues that people did to, and it was like this experience of almost all of a sudden being overwhelmed because all of these things had always been there, but I never even noticed them. So I started making notes about them, and that I really think was the beginning of the eye movements. Mm-hmm. Now they didn't say no, it's not true.
No.
But I was the first one to actually write down what I thought each one meant.
And how did you become an NLP star? One of the most famous authors in Russia.
Well, first of all, I think that's an interesting thing. Like I said, nobody was really teaching NLP then, and NLP didn't really exist yet. So, but one of the things that I could do was I could write down what I observed, and so I actually did a lot of writing.
In that time, there wasn't seminars, that was just workshops.
And
that's it.
Yeah.
But you write everything and...
What John and Richard used to coach us to do, which I think was a very interesting thing, is they had what they called a meta book. Mm-hmm. And a meta book is like a notebook where you would write down observations and questions.
Really good.
So I would take my meta book and I would write down a little paper, or I would write down a description of something. And it turns out, I could write. It wasn't so hard for me. I think it's harder for some people to write. It wasn't so easy at first, but so I would write things down, and then Richard and John they'd say, oh, I like that, and they would take it and give it to people. So
in that time you were a special resource.
I was a special resource. But also, in those times, we were very passionate and enthusiastic, so we wanted to share, right? The idea. There was always this feeling like, oh, wow, this is going to change the world. So, and Richard and John, basically, they were giving us the belief that you can do anything you want, So we would go and so they were always just go for it, and they were always doing it. So we would start to teach our own little. The first programs I did were with 5 people in my living room or something like this.
Are you lucky?
Of course, I'm lucky. Preparation and opportunity.
Maybe you have been working hard for a lot of years, doing a lot of work, and
yes, and the answer is both. I think it was. I've heard this from several people that they say, I think. Like I've heard athletes say this, oh yes, my success is because I'm lucky, but the harder I work, the luckier I am. But what happened is then because I was also good friends with David Gordon and Leslie and Judith, and then we started really to put together the first trainings. And Richard and John gathered a small group of people, me, David Gordon, Leslie Cameron, Judith Delosier, and we started to plan what would be an NLP, just NLP training. Because before that, Bandler and Grinder were doing a lot of training in hypnosis and Erickson, but we really wanted to do NLP. Because
what are the difference between the NLP and the hypnosis?
Well, because first of all, I mean, NLP you can use for so many more things than just hypnosis. You know, you would say, from the perspective of NLP, hypnosis is one part, a certain kind of altered states, certain way of using language. But there's many other ways of using your senses, and there are many different states that don't have to be, quote, hypnosis. Because hypnosis is basically like a Greek word meaning to sleep. But NLP you didn't have to use only in that context, so it was much more flexible, much more versatile.
Why did you decide to do your Millennium Project?
Well, so we started, first of all, we started teaching, and we formed what was called it was a funny name, because in English, when you make a company, you say it's something limited. Now, limited means it's a special word, but it has a nice play. So there was a company that they made called Not Limited, and so that was the first NLP training company, and we started doing certifications, and then NLP grew, and that's really how I became an NLP trainer. Was actually in the very beginning, I started not as a trainer but as an assistant. So Richard and John would do trainings, and
it was a natural process.
Yeah, it's a natural process.
And become more.
And I still think one of the best ways to learn to be a trainer is to start by being an assistant. And I say that because when you're not the teacher, but you're really helping people learn, you know what they need, right? It's very different when you stand up there and present. And I know some people that when they're presenting, where they're putting on a show, it's not really teaching. So to really learn to be a trainer, you have to know what is it like to be on the other side in the participant role and in the assistant role, because that's where you really learn where do people get stuck and they get confused and they don't understand. And I think that really helps you to be a better trainer. So we started these programs that were very much coming from, what we call, a mission, a vision. Now, what happened with NLP after that is it began to grow and become a business. Because when I first started in NLP, today people say, oh, I want to do NLP and make a lot of money. Well, nobody made money in NLP. It was like, it wasn't a job, My parents were very worried, How will you survive if you teach NLP?
I think if you would become from making a lot of money, you would never invented NLP.
Well, I think that the mission to teach is not about making money. I think that for me, in a world of abundance, if you do a good job, then it comes to you in a way that's most appropriate. So, but that's not what I found that is interesting. When I first started doing NLP, I didn't charge very much, and I didn't get very many people, and they didn't seem to really get all that much out of the program. So then I started charging more, and I got more people, and they got more out of the program. And there is an aspect in our world today where money is like an investment that says, okay, if you don't charge enough, it's like you're saying it's not valuable. So there is an interesting thing where I realized, okay, it's not really about money or not money, but you have to you have to give a value to something. And if you just give it away, people think, well, it must not be so interesting. And because I would find the things that people were paying money for and thinking was really valuable, it was sometimes not very good. So you need to take your place. And in that case, that's where actually, as one of my mentors said, he said, money is a marker. It's a marker of value. And I think that's important. Anyway, about the Millennium Project, what we wanted to do, what we've always wanted to do is, our experience was NLP grew out of this community, right, out of this field. Richard and John were the founders, but NLP really grew through passion, through vision, through values. And as NLP became a business, it sort of lost its connection. And as people that were trainers making trainers, you had people that were, their view of NLP was very distorted, very minimal. And so we were really wanting to bring together and share difference, really also feel the sense of passion, a field, a vision, a mission, values. Not just share techniques, but share values, share vision. And I think that's necessary to do for the field, which is why I think having these kind of conferences and festivals where you're bringing people who are really doing the best work in NLP, and best, it doesn't have to be hierarchical, but people who have committed their 10,000 hours into NLP, and but also new people who want to just share ideas. This to me is the notion of a collective intelligence. That NLP is not about two gurus and everybody does what they say. NLP, because even John and Richard never encouraged that. They didn't want to be gurus. They were always encouraging us. You go do it. You can be you do what you want. NLP is about being the best of yourself. It's not about being like me, And we really learned that from them and from Erickson and the people that were the original models in NLP. It was a lot of integrity in the early NLP. It wasn't just a business. I mean, it's become a business, and that's a good thing in a way, because it means it probably helps it to get out. But the idea of the Millennium Project was to share ideas, share knowledge, because the economy of ideas is different than the economy of money. Thomas Jefferson, one of the American presidents, said something very interesting. He said, if you get together, and you exchange $1 or ruble, you get one. But when you exchange ideas, that's his favorite phrase. So that's what I think happens in these festivals. Everybody walks away with many ideas. So by sharing your ideas, you're increasing the collective intelligence of everybody.
You're not just successful on your own.
That means we'll have synergy effects.
Exactly. You actually, when you exchange ideas, you go away with more than two, because you have the synergies of those two. What I think about the Millennium Project is I think that it was successful in many ways. We're always trying to improve the way that we work with this collective intelligence. I would like to see more follow-ups to the Millennium Project. And one of the reasons that I think it's successful is there's still people today where, when I talk to them, they're referring to the Millennium Project and who was at the Millennium Project. When I was just in Japan, there was a man, George Horiguchi, who was a Japanese man who was there. And that's one of his big experiences of his life, because it really was bringing NLP trainers, high-level NLP trainers from all over the world together to share common projects and common values and define the evolving field of NLP. Because, as much as I love them and as much as I appreciate them, Bandler and Grinder can no longer define the field of NLP. they're not the only pioneers. There's many other pioneers. So to define the field of NLP, we need to bring all the people who are creating NLP. I mean, I look at the work that's being done here and modeling in Russia and geniuses. Well, Richard and John didn't do that. They don't know that, right? So that's not, I mean, so everybody has to bring together our collective. And I think even from the beginning, NLP wasn't just Bandler and Grinder. Obviously, there was Erickson, there was Bateson, there was Satir. But there was also David Gordon and Leslie. And it grew from that field.
Yeah.
And Richard and John were the center of it. It was important that they be a reference point. But they were drawing.
During All Russian Festival of NLP, and Andrei Pligin and Alexander Kerasimov helps us a lot.
Yes.
And sometimes we meet people who says it's no important. I don't understand why am I go to this festival. I am a trainer. I have my own center in a very small town, and it's enough for me.
By the way, in the United States, completely different situation.
Yeah.
That I understand a lot of sentences like meet each other, share ideas, and to do something unique together and so on.
Sometimes our people write in table, nobody knows.
Well, this is what I think. This is exactly that point I was making about NLP as a vision and mission versus NLP as a business, right? So the attitude if somebody says, well, I have my own little business and my own little place, I don't need to learn anything more. For them, it's only a business. And this is what we were trying to do. Yeah, what's what we're trying to do with the Millennium Project is say, actually, NLP is much more. And unfortunately, sure, I can understand their perspective. Okay, I don't need anything more. But because the world is developing so quickly, because NLP is evolving so quickly, they're going to be left way behind.
So it's not a good strategy to be.
No, I don't think so. I think if you model successful people, I don't think I've ever met a genius or a successful person who said, I don't need to do anything except my own little thing, and stay right where I am, and put myself in this box, and never learn or do anything. I've never met a good leader who says, oh, I already know everything about leadership, I don't have to learn anything more. Every good leader says, I'm always learning to be a better leader. It's a life learning. And I learn from everybody. This is the great thing about NLP is that we model each other. I've learned from my colleagues, I've learned from my children, I've learned from my clients as much as from Erickson or Bateson. The great thing is when you can model, you can learn from everybody. You can learn from everything. So, and I think especially, I love to go to these kinds of festivals because I always get something new from each person's perspective and their vision. It's really, I think it's something. It's the place. If you don't have these kind of conferences, then I think the field is dying, because they're how the community grows. Then you really do have a bunch of people just with their own little business. Community will not be able to grow, right? Exactly. And then you just have a bunch of people doing their own thing, and it dies. So what I say is, this is not a very. I mean, I can understand the positive intention. I don't judge that attitude, but it's not going to be a very successful attitude. It's not going to contribute to the field. It's not going to contribute to that person's own growing. So when somebody says, I don't understand, why should I go? It's like saying, why should you breathe? I just already breathed. I breathed a minute ago. Why should I breathe?
When you were organizer of your Millennium Project, have you met such kind of people?
No, because the ones that were like that didn't come. They said, I'm not going to go. But that's why, in a way, the Millennium Project drew people who did share.
That was 25 countries.
Yeah.
That means participants came from 20.
We had over 100 participants from 25
countries. Yes.
And which
All over the
country
world.
is the most prominent
That's
expert
amazing.
in
That's
NLP
tremendously
now?
great.
That's a good question. Which country? You know, each country has its own, you know, relationship with NLP. And I think in some countries, NLP has more credibility, but it's maybe not so creative. In other countries, there's a lot, it's really going and it's being very creative. So it's difficult to say, you know, which countries. I mean, right now, there's big interest in NLP in Asian countries, South Korea, China, because they're really just becoming interested in NLP. But I wouldn't say that NLP is growing in those. I mean, it's evolving. It's growing in terms of number of people interested, but they're learning NLP as it is. I think in other countries, you know, I'm thinking, you know, the emphasis that Andre and Alexander place on modeling. Then you're having an NLP that's evolving. It's not just these techniques and those techniques. It's really evolving. So I think in Russia, it's very exciting that there's this really passion about the generativity in NLP. You know, NLP is very popular, for example, in England, and has a lot of credibility. But all the books in England are the same thing. You know, it's the same thing about written this way.
Different ways.
The last question is why England? Why not America, but England? What do you think about it?
Well, I think probably that first of all, maybe it has to do with the people who brought NLP into England. I think also maybe England is a little bit more, how would I say, the values of people are a little bit more the same, you know.
Like United States, absolutely.
Yeah. But I think that they don't have the same political kind of conflicting as in the United States. What I've noticed is that the institutes, and this is actually another interesting thing about how NLP grows. In the countries where NLP is the most successful are where the different institutes do the most cooperation. And I think actually in England, there's the least fighting between people and the most cooperation. Even if they have their own identity, you know, I mean, they have their own business and their own, but they acknowledge each other. And
That's
when
great.
there's a conference,
That's great.
all of the organizations are represented.
So it's important to cooperate, to meet, to include something new.
Yeah. So I think it's about this acceptance of difference.
They're skilled to be together.
Yeah. So to have your own identity, right? So you're not saying, well, it doesn't matter. I have my own way, my own identity, but I'm open to accept, to acknowledge difference.
Mm-hmm.
And that's in, you know, there's you know, a lot of that in England. There's some of that in the United States. Then there's other countries where it's basically NLP institutes fight each other. Mm-hmm. And it's not good for NLP, it's not good for the institute.
Unfortunately, it's happening in Russia also.
Well, you know, I think it's a natural cycle in some ways, because there were times in England where there was more struggle. But there's a nice cycle. I don't know if I forget the name of the guy who came up with this idea from ecology, from sustainable development, that's called the adaptive cycle. It's like and you have a period of growth, and then a period of stability. Then there's a period of breakdown, regression, and then there's a period of a new, what would you say, dissemination, fertilization, and then growth again. And I think this stage of what they sometimes in economics it's called creative destruction. Yeah, it's creative destruction where you have struggle and it's necessary for something new to come. A little bit like revolution, yeah? And then there's revolution, then evolution. And so I don't know, but I think that probably one of the main skills that we need to learn is cooperation. And I always like to say, and this is true, that that's the one part that wasn't really built into the earliest NLP. Because what I point out is NLP came from two rebels, right? Two revolutionaries, Bandler and Grinder, who were modeling three loners. Three people that were always, Erickson was always alone, Pearls was alone, Satir was alone. So there wasn't, community wasn't necessarily a big part, it was more individuality. And that's why I say the first generation of NLP was more individuality.
Mm-hmm. And second?
And the second is more about kind of like working together, partnering, like coaching, teaming, but really to have real collective intelligence, like big cooperation is our third generation.
We're expecting third generation will be field.
Field. Is this? Okay. I'm working on the book, we're calling it NLP2.
Mm-hmm.
The next generation, and it's about field.
But it sounds like NLP volume second.
Well, there never was one, so.
Good metaphor.
But it's a good metaphor.
Yeah, good metaphor.
Thank you very much.